on remittances. My name is Céu Pereira. I'm the team leader for retail payments at the FISMA Directorate in the European Commission. I would like first to give a brief overview about the FIGI program. The Financial Inclusion Global Initiative, FIGI, is a partnership between the World Bank Group, the Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructures, and of the Bank for International Settlements and the International Telecommunication Union, which was founded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to support and accelerate the implementation of country-led reform actions to meet national financial inclusion targets and ultimately the global universal financial access goal. FIGI funds national implementations in 3 countries, China, Egypt, and Mexico. It supports working groups to tackle 3 sets of outstanding challenges for reaching universal financial access, which are electronic payment acceptance, digital ID for financial services, and security, infrastructure, and trust. And it hosts the symposia. This is the 3rd and final edition of the FIGI Symposium. The FIGI Symposium provides a forum for dialogue amongst telecom and financial sector authorities, financial services providers, digital financial services providers, and related stakeholders to share experiences and perspectives on scaling up digital financial services. Today, in this session, we will explore the topic of digitalization of remittances, which has been discussed a lot over the last years. But however, we have now a clear momentum with the pandemics, which has indeed brought significant changes in the remittances market. So we will indeed explore all the aspects of digitalization in the remittances sector, which can also be taken, leveraged as an opportunity to improve services for end users. Today, we have an almost all-female panel, and this is fine with me, which is composed of 3 eminent female colleagues, Victoria Cleland, Executive Director for Banking, Payments and Innovation at the Bank of England. We have also Gabriela Guibourg, who is the Head of Analysis and Policy Payments Department at the Central Bank of Sweden. From the industry side, we will have Veronica Stutzhart, who is the founder and CEO of the IAMTN network. And finally, last but not least, our male colleague, Raymond Estioko, who is a senior director for Payment Systems Oversight Department at the Central Bank of the Philippines. So without further introduction, we will have a video from Victoria Cleland to start the session today.
Hello, I'm Victoria Cleland, the Executive Director for Banking, Payments and Innovation at the Bank of England. But I'm also here today with a second hat on as the Deputy Chair of the Cross-Border Payments Programme Coordination Board, part of the Committee of Payment and Market Infrastructure. Last year, I chaired a CPMI working group looking at how we could enhance cross-border payments. So I'm really excited to be here today to spread the word about the importance of this subject and also to think about how we can focus more on implementation and making a real difference. Cross-border payments are absolutely essential to the global economy. In a world that's increasingly global and digital, the importance of cross-border payments is increasing. The value of cross-border payments is estimated to increase from nearly 150 trillion in 2017 to over 250 trillion in 2027. And at a time when we're still in the midst of the COVID pandemic, enhancing cross-border payments is going to be even more important than before. There's so many other things to sort of worry about. If we can get rid of at least some of these frictions and enhance cross-border trade, that will be really, really fantastic. But it's not just the big wholesale markets that we're talking about here, and it's not just trade, it's actually many members of the public. Flows of remittances in some economies are actually greater than 30% of their GDP. So for them, remittances are key as a source of external financing. And I think this is something that's probably going to increase going forward. We also know that remittance flows from low and middle income countries reached a record high of 584 billion in 2019, which is actually larger than the foreign direct investment flows into those countries. This is something that we think is going to grow and grow. So solving issues around speed of payments and remittances to these countries and also their cost is really important. And in terms of costs, the average cost of sending $200 has remained at about 7% since 2017. And this is still way above the 3% target that's been set to achieve by 2030 under the Agenda for Sustainable Development. And what is really important and what makes this really come to life for me is the fact that each percentage point in transaction cost deprives the receiving families globally of about £5.5 billion a year. These are really big numbers, and this is really somewhere that we can make a difference. But although cross-border payments are really, really important, the significant challenges, these are set into sort of four key buckets, so to speak. One is cross-border payments are typically much slower, they cost more, they can be more difficult to access, and there's a lack of transparency around those payments. So when people say that they'd like to make the payment, they don't necessarily know when it's going to arrive or how much that whole process will cost. And as a stylized fact, cross-border payments can be up to 10 times slower than domestic payments, and they can be 10 times more expensive. So that's one of the reasons why it's so important to see how best we can enhance them. It's a long-standing issue and it's a multi-dimensional problem. There isn't a single bullet, and it's something where strong international collaboration is going to be really important if we're going to make a difference. Cross-border payments are hard to solve. They're more complicated than domestic payments, often involving many players, many countries, many time zones, many jurisdictions, and many regulations. And remittances can actually be even more complicated than some of the more traditional cross-border payments. I'd now like to just highlight some of the specific challenges for remittances. They're stylized facts. Some of them are a slight over-exaggeration of the issues, but I think that understanding them in this way can really help us to get to the heart of the problem and decide what collectively we can do. I think a key part of the issue is that many of the payers and the payees are actually unbanked. Global Findex databases indicate that 94% adults in high-income countries have a transactional account, but just 63% in developing countries. So just that first step into the ladder is much more difficult. And actually not being part of a formal financial system can lead to additional challenges, in particular in terms of customer identification. It can take longer to identify people and to verify them. And whilst for some this might sound like a sort of fairly bureaucratic step, it is absolutely crucial in terms of making sure that we can undertake proper anti-money laundering and counter-financing checks. Another trend we're seeing is actually that global de-risking by some of the banks has led to a reduction in the number of banks operating in some of the more high remittance corridors. So there's less competitive pressure on costs, but importantly for some, it's just becoming much more difficult to access a service at all. Remittance payments are likely to travel through multiple time zones and multiple jurisdictions as they're sort of reaching the end destination. This can slow things down, partly because the payment systems might not be open at the same time in these different areas, but different types of AML checks will be going through. And also we know that remittance payments are often low in value compared to sort of wholesale or corporate payments, but actually some of the effort involved in processing them can be as high. And so the percentage wise, the costs can seem extremely high. Sometimes people might even say extortionate. And so why are cross-border payments getting so much attention now? They've been important for a long time. So why the attention? And I think it's partly three different areas of change affecting the payments landscape internationally. One, as I said at the start, the global economy is increasingly dependent on cross-border flows. We're seeing a much greater movement of goods, services and people. So there are higher expectations of what we need from cross-border payments. We're seeing lots of change in the domestic payments market, particularly to increase speed, cost, efficiency. For example, an increase in the number of faster payment systems. We're seeing the development of FedNow. We're not seeing the same changes in the cross-border market. And also innovation and technology are creating a whole range of new possibilities for cross-border transactions. There's lots of talk about digital currencies, stable coins and things. Maybe they can be the answer, maybe it's something more simple, but it's a time when we're seeing great change in technology, a real opportunity to grasp that to improve cross-border payments. And so last year, the G20 made enhancing cross-border payments a key priority for 2020, and it's now focused on implementing the roadmap that came out of last year's work. This is only going to be possible through public and private sector collaboration. There are three stages to the G20's work, and very briefly, the first one, really important, to understand what are the issues. So the Financial Stability Board, in coordination with a number of other international organisations and standard setting bodies, went to really understand what are the issues, and we go back to those sort of four challenges I spoke about in terms of speed, cost, access and transparency, and to dig even deeper, what are the frictions that are causing those? Why are cross-border payments slower? So a report was published in April 2020. Based on that, the CPMI working group, which I was really fortunate to be leading, looked to think, okay, if these are the frictions and the challenges, what can we do to solve them? And we developed a set of 19 building blocks, each addressing at least one of these underlying frictions and the challenges. And then throughout the late summer and autumn, the FSB, CPMI and others, including the World Bank and the IMF, worked to develop a roadmap. So taking each building block and from that, devising a number of different actions that needed to be taken forward. This roadmap was published in October 2020, and now people are busy thinking how best to implement it. So this shows what the building blocks are. I'm not going to go through all 19 of them at the moment. There's lots of information on the reports that are available on the FSB website. But I would like to sort of bring to your attention the 5 key focus areas that we think are so important to enhancing cross-border payment. The first one is around setting a public and private sector commitment to what needs to be done and really articulating the vision. We've said we want to enhance cross-border payments, but what does this mean? So this is all around setting some hard quantitative targets so people know what to aim for and some guidance in terms of how those targets can be met. The second group is around regulatory, supervisory and oversight frameworks. And important to this is actually sort of traditional prudential oversight of financial market infrastructures, but it goes further than that. It's also thinking about issues around AML, it's looking at KYC, it's beginning to look at cross-border data frameworks as well. The third focus area is enhancing the existing payment infrastructures and arrangements. So really looking at the systems that we've got at the moment, how can we make those better? For example, can we extend operating hours? If more systems are open 24/7 or even 20 hours a day, would that make a big difference, particularly when you're going along those very long corridors? Can we open up access to the system for more players than has traditionally been the case? So increasing competition, but also letting members from other countries join, looking at different ways to interlink payment systems. So really seeing the structure we've got at the moment and trying to use modern technology, modern techniques to enhance that. Another really important area is around data and market practices. There's a lot of work going on globally at the moment to introduce ISO 20022, a global messaging standard for payments, but also looking at different protocols, introducing, for example, legal entity identifiers to help understand who an individual is, bringing in, for example, digital ID. So those 4 focus areas show a whole range of different pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, and if each of these are enhanced, we really do think it will make a big difference. But there's also focus area E, which is much more forward-looking, a bit more exploratory, but seeing are there new types of payment infrastructure and arrangements that could be used. For example, if stablecoin or if central bank issued digital currencies were to emerge domestically in a safe way, is there an opportunity to build on these to actually enable more efficient cross-border payment? Or actually, could we be thinking of something completely different, setting up new multilateral payment platforms or different arrangements? So a very far-reaching set of building blocks covering a range of different areas. Quite a big challenge there, and I'm sorry it isn't just one single bullet. I've highlighted some of the sort of next steps. What I want to sort of reiterate is that each of the building blocks that I've just shown has an owner. Many are sort of lead owned by CPMI, some by FSB, some by FATFA, and by other standard setting bodies. And they're all working hard to pursue the actions in the roadmap. A key part of that is actually going to be engaging closely with the private sector as well, explaining what's happening, keeping up momentum, gaining buy-in, and there'll be some collective actions. So I would encourage everyone here today to think about what part you can play. Is it spreading the word? Is it trying to understand the issues more? Have you got a role you can play in pushing forward those actions? May 2021 is an important milestone for the roadmap, with the FSB Cross-Border Payment Task Force publishing the proposed targets for cross-border payments. So setting mainly quantitative targets for speed, cost, access, and in transparency. There's a public consultation at the moment, and I'd really encourage everybody here to respond. Do you think that those targets are challenging enough? Is there more we can do? Or are there any that you think are a bit too ambitious? We're really, really interested to hear your views on that, because I think setting these targets is really pinning down the vision for the future and showing the public and the private sector what they need to do to get there. It's a big prize, but there's a lot of work. In October this year, the G20 leaders will be endorsing those final targets, so reflecting feedback from the consultation. And in summer 2022, the FSB Cross-Border Payment Committee will be providing a first report about how progress is being made against these targets. So there's a lot going on in this space. It isn't going to be an easy issue to solve. It's something that people have been trying to solve for decades. But I think now, with the roadmap, with clear actors and owners, the prize is ours for the taking. Thank you.
So we're going back to the session, and this video by Victoria was an excellent introduction on the G20 roadmap. The session will explore how digitalization of remittances has been accelerated by COVID-19 and can increase financial access and inclusion, and how the G20 roadmap that was presented just now on enhancing cross-border payments can support this development. In fact, international remittances can foster access to and use of transaction accounts by both senders and recipients. However, this potential remains largely untapped because remittance senders prefer to use cash-based services. However, the pandemic has changed that. It has changed the picture for a number of reasons. It has affected in a fundamental way the offering of remittances by the private sector with different business models and also different behaviors from the remittance senders. The various restrictions that happened with the lockdowns actually had indeed this effect that many flows shifted to digital channels. So that's the transformation that we are observing. And with the G20 Roadmap and the momentum to finally, perhaps I would say, improve drastically cross-border payments, there is an opportunity that needs to be seized. And in fact, it has been observed that as a result of the pandemic, now in 3/4 of the corridors around the world, digital services are offered to end users. So we will discuss how indeed these changes are transforming the remittances sector, what opportunities we can seize, how the implementation of the G20 roadmap will help. I will have indeed the three panelists that we have here with us today to indeed contribute to this debate. And I will briefly now introduce our next presentation and our next panelist who will present. This is Raymond Estioko. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Raymond. As I said before, he's Senior Director for the Payment System and Oversight Department at the Central Bank of the Philippines. And he has a lot of experience in the central bank, also leading national reforms on retail payments. So very keen to hear from Raymond about the topic. Raymond, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Sue, for the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon to others, and good evening to us here in Southeast Asia. Allow me first to thank the World Bank, the ITU, and CPMI for inviting the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas in today's session. It is my privilege to share with you our experiences and insights on banking the unbanked through international remittances. Next slide, please. To provide a run-through of my discussion, first, I will touch on the status of the Philippines in terms of digital payments adoption, followed by how the COVID-19 pandemic has made an impact in increasing the trajectory of digitalization. Next, I will present the remittance landscape for the Philippines, followed by our enabling regulatory framework. Finally, I will show the BSP's Digital Payments Transformation Roadmap, which reveals promoting remittances is aligned in achieving the overall goals underpinned in the roadmap. Next slide, please. Based on the recent country diagnostic, the volume of monthly digital payments in the Philippines grew to 14% or 660 million transactions in 2019. This increase in volume was driven primarily by high-frequency, low-value retail transactions like merchant payments, And in terms of value, digital payments grew to 24% of all transactions in 2019, or to 29.7 billion US dollars. This is a significant improvement from the first country diagnostic made in our country in 2013, where only 1% was discovered to be made electronically. Next slide, please. Recent data supports the likelihood for digital payments adoption to grow even further. The first half of 2020 estimates show that digital payments by government units increased by 82% compared to 54% in 2013. 19% of payments by individual consumers were made digitally. On the other hand, digital merchant payments grew to 66% in 2019 from 13% in 2018. Also, in a span of 6.5 years, the number of Filipinos who own debit and prepaid cards nearly doubled from 12.7 million in 2013 to 23.3 million in the first half of 2020. By the first half of 2020, active mobile money accounts had jumped to 14 million from 5 million in 2018, showing that the COVID-19 pandemic and the implementation of health protocols has also catalyzed the shift in awareness to use digital payments. So the increase in digital payments adoption has significant linkages to the country's financial inclusion landscape. Next slide, please. Digital technology can indeed promote financial inclusion. Formal account ownership grew to 29% in 2019 from 23% in 2017. Key drivers of this growth are increase in account ownership in socioeconomic class E by 13 percentage points, increase in e-money account holders by 7 points, and 300% growth in active e-money wallets from 2017 to 2019. Active usage of accounts more than doubled from 18% to 39%. And almost 70% of Filipino adults own a mobile phone, while over half are internet users. However, only a negligible share conducts financial transactions using their phones on the internet. Moreover, the BSP notes that 7 out of 10 adults have mobile phones but remain unbanked. These results highlights how digital payments serve as an imperative in promoting financial inclusion. The promise of digital technology likewise needs to be deliberately harnessed to pave the way to greater financial inclusion. Next slide, please. The outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic emerged as a significant catalyst. Next slide, please. The outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic emerged as a significant catalyst to hasten the development in and deployment of innovations to adapt to the new normal, one that is characterized by physical mobility, restrictions, alternative working arrangements, and limited face-to-face transactions, among others. These circumstances have served as a springboard for the adoption of digital financial services. As to remittances, it has been noted that remittance companies with digital platforms is seen to have increased in volume of transactions since the start of the pandemic. The increasing use of digital channels is attributed to the convenience of its use and the avoidance of risk brought about by the exposure to the COVID-19 virus. Moreover, these initiatives to reduce is complemented by the reduction or completely making free digital transactions, and this contributed significantly to the growing digital channels. Next slide, please. Based on the 2019 surveys of overseas Filipinos, which was conducted from April to September 2019, the number of overseas Filipinos who work abroad at any time was estimated at 2.2 million. Meanwhile, overseas contract workers or those with existing work contract comprised 96.8% of these overseas Filipinos. The survey also showed that 1.9 million overseas Filipinos sent remittances to their families. Of this number, 32.8% were able to save from their cash remittances. Total remittances was estimated to reach 211.9 billion pesos, which included cash sent sent home, 157.9 billion, cash brought home by fellow Filipinos, and remittances in kind worth about 7.3 billion. Being the fourth largest remittance receiving country in the world, the Philippines experienced contraction in remittances flows as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Cash remittances to the Philippines declined by 0.8% to 29.9 billion US dollars in 2020 from 30.1 billion dollars in 2019. Based on the Philippine Development Plan for 2017 to 2022, Filipinos overseas send annual remittances equivalent to about 10% of the Philippine GDP. Next slide, please. The BSP's adoption of the National Retail Payment System Framework leveraged on the principle of interoperability, where customers can transfer funds from their own accounts to any BSP-regulated institutions. Through this, overseas Filipinos and their families can send and receive remittances more conveniently. There is also certainty of when the money is credited to the account of the beneficiaries. And lastly, the amount remitted are received in full, that is without any deductions. Likewise, the BSP engages fintech players and innovators through a flexible test and learn environment, or the regulatory sandbox, which allows pilot testing of innovative business models. For example, we have a local e-money issuer and a digital wallet provider in other country that host overseas Filipinos, and they partner to facilitate cross-border remittances between our two countries, powered by blockchain technology. This provides a more convenient way for the Filipino community to send money in the Philippines electronically instead of physically going to remittance centers. And the BSP has also approved the inclusion of digital banks as a distinct classification of banks to help expand the digitalization of the financial sector to pursue financial inclusion. And the BSP is also promoting the remittance receiving household so they can enjoy the benefit of maintaining an account or transaction account. And BSP also aims to democratize access to a transaction account for all Filipinos and make it relevant and valuable. Remittance is a low-hanging fruit. 35 million Filipino adults are recipients of remittances. However, only 21 million have an account. So these represent a huge untapped client base for transaction accounts and digital financial inclusion. Next slide, please. Hinging from BSP's Digital Transformation Roadmap 2020 to 2023, with the strengthened customer preference for digital payments as one of its strategic outcomes, the Philippine remittance industry is seen to move toward the same direction. As a net remittance receiving country, global initiatives like the G20 Crossborder Payments Roadmap will help improve our country's remittance services landscape. This is all for my presentation, and I thank you for listening to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raymond. This was a very comprehensive overview of the recent developments in your market, and it will indeed be useful to feed our discussion later on. Now I am going to turn to another panelist, Gabriela. Gabriela is well known for the e-krona project. She has been working at the Central Bank of Sweden for many years in various positions, and she for sure has some interesting perspectives, in particular on the forward-looking initiatives that are considered within the remit of the G20 Roadmap and the new platforms such as indeed central bank digital currencies. But I'm sure she will elaborate on a few topics beyond that. Gabriela, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Theo, and thank you for the organizers of this session for inviting me to provide a Swedish perspective on this very important topic, I would say. Also, big thanks to Victoria for her excellent overview of the G20 work to improve cross-border payments. I would say this is an unprecedented initiative that keeps central banks and international organizations around the world very, very busy at the time, but for an important cause. As Victoria said, the prize is very large. At the Riksbank, we are heavily engaged in this initiative. Concretely, our first deputy governor, Cecilia Skingsley, is, as some of you may know, chairing the working group exploring how new payment infrastructures and arrangements can possibly play a role in easing frictions of cross-border payments. That is the focus E that Victoria was talking about, and it is also called the Future of Payments subgroup. That comprises 3 blocks: multilateral cross-border payments, stable coins, used also for cross-border payments and properly regulated, of course, and CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, that are interoperable with each other, so that can be used also for cross-border, cross-currency payments. whether any of these sectors or blocks can make a difference also for remittances, it is too early to say, in my view, but we hope so. For many central banks, this growing interest in cross-border payments represents quite a change in mindset after years of focusing on domestic payments. And of course, the latter is completely natural because it's in the mandate of central banks to promote secure and efficient payment systems. But now we have been, after many years of dedicated work, we have been able to improve and further improve domestic payment systems, and now we are allowed to look beyond and abroad, and urgently so in light of the rapidly increasing cross-border volumes that also Victoria was pointing to. When doing that, what strikes you immediately is the lack of consistent and reliable data on cross-border payments, which, for example, domestic payments were used to feeling on safe ground when it comes to data. For cross-border payments, however, and despite the huge efforts by, in particular, the World Bank, you are left somewhere in the dark in terms of volumes and prices. And this is, of course, a problem when we are to assess the future global targets that Victoria talked about. And I will come back to these targets later on. The lack of reliable data applies, of course, also to remittances in Sweden. We try to see through the dark by gathering information through dialogue, in principle, with market players. And despite imperfect statistics, we know that Sweden is a typical net sending country. A large share of our remittances are going to countries in Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and other parts of Asia. And Sweden probably shares many of the challenges of cross-border payments described in last year's FSB and CPMI reports. But having said that, financial exclusion is less of a problem in Sweden. Moreover, purely digitalized remittance service providers have entered the market in Sweden lately. And those service providers have clearly contributed to increasing competition. And based on the information from the World Bank's price database, they offer their services at fairly low cost. Of course, that makes it even more relevant to understand the barriers, technical, legal, or commercial, that those providers face. One important barrier or challenge that we constantly hear about when we talk with these kind of service providers stems from the well-known and also named, talked about by Victoria, the well-known trend of de-risking, where banks cease their business relations with money remitters due to AML and CTF concerns. And this has potential consequences to make remittances for certain corridors more costly or drive them underground. And none of those outcomes are desirable, of course, and should be avoided, which is why the building block 5 of the G20 Roadmap that concerns how AML and CTF regulations are to be applied in cross-border payments is very important. Finally, before I close my introductory remarks, I would like to get back to the G20 targets that I said before. And like Victoria, I would like to draw your attention to the very important consultation report published by the FSB in May, which suggested targets for cross-border payments as regards remittances and costs. They basically confirm the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which say that by 2030, average costs, covering both fees and currency exchange costs, should not exceed 3% of the value sent. And compared to current costs, this is an ambitious target, but we have to be ambitious, I think. I stop here for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabriela. These were very wise words. Let's be ambitious, indeed. And now I would like to give the floor to Veronica. Veronica is adding to this panel the perspective of the industry, as she has been working in the remittance industry for many years. She has founded IAMTN, which was per se, I would say, a great initiative, because there was no such representation of the remittance industry before. So I guess her perspective will be very important to further set the scene of this panel discussion. Thank you. The floor is yours, Veronica.
Thank you very much, Seu. And I would like to say thank you to Victoria for a great presentation, and also to Gino for the, Raymond, sorry, for the presentation of the Central Bank of Philippines. I think it clearly shows that what we've been saying, that remittances obviously, we notice an important shift from the traditional channel from cash to the digital after COVID, well, with COVID-19. COVID was definitely a catalyst. But talking about the roadmap, I think I'm very glad to see that, you know, when we talk about this and we talk about cross-border payments, and actually remittances are included, cross-border remittances are included. And it's not just the view of the banks, because that's what sometimes happen, you know. But and I would like to highlight a few things. Victoria mentioned about the importance of the strong collaboration from different stakeholders. I think that's very key, because we saw in the past, working with some of the fragmentation that the industry has, that not always we have the collaboration that we need from all the stakeholders. Remittances have shown that they are more important than what people normally thought with COVID-19. And that showed that, for example, there were many, the scaling up of the remittances was very important. It was a priority suddenly. So scaling up to digital for those that were offering cash, and those that were offering digital to scale up with different services and products. So they've been linking products and services with financial technology. And this is something key that we have to keep in mind when we think about the roadmap. We were talking about if the plan is more ambitious enough, the targets are, the plan is incredible ambition. The industry is very fragmented, and there are a lot of things that could be improved, of course, and many of these things have been highlighted with this COVID crisis. One of the things is the lack of reliable data, like also Gabriela highlighted. That is very important. We need to work out on that, to have reliable data. And another thing that that was highlighted is financial exclusion. Gabriela mentioned that in Sweden they don't have, they have less of a problem with financial exclusion. I must say that from our side, from the remittance industry, we noticed that the Nordic, it's a problem when it comes to financial inclusion of the migrants and the remittance services providers. So this is something that we have been discussing with FIGI or the Financial Stability Board about the issues that we have with banking the industry, which is a challenge that persists, and that we find it quite difficult to discuss at the same time. So there are a few things, you know, that COVID-19 highlighted even more than I think we should consider when we are talking about the roadmap. It's not the first time remittances are within the agenda of the G20. So obviously we are very excited on collaborating with this roadmap and to see what is going to change this time. So I think I will leave it there, and we can go for the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Veronica, for these initial remarks. And now we will get to the discussion amongst us. And perhaps, I would like to start by talking about the market, how the market has adapted to this digitalization trend. And perhaps I would start with Raymond with regard to innovations in the fintech sphere in the Philippines. How do you think that fintech innovations have impacted remittances in your jurisdiction, and which innovations in particular have enabled more vulnerable people to access remittances?
There are many of us Filipinos who don't have a government ID. So starting this year, the government have started to issue a national ID for all of us Filipinos to get the biometrics based on the retina of our eyes and our 10 fingers. And of those that have started to register for this ID, about 3.8 million Filipinos of these unbanked have already been onboarded and now has an account with a government bank. So that's one of the benefits of the financial technology. And another one is the tie-up between, because most of our remittances are international remittances flowing through the banks. Then there's now a tie-up between the banks who receive that remittances to the other non-bank financial institutions, like the smaller. What we have here is pawn shop. There's a partnership because these pawn shops are very ubiquitous. So the channeling of these international remittances are made electronically, digitally, and it's the pawn shop who disperse the cash if the beneficiary does not have an account yet. Otherwise, it's credited to the account of the beneficiary. And another incentive that we have provided for those accounts, for those beneficiaries that have an account, that there is certainty of when they will be able to receive their payments. It's either not later than the end of day, and that the amount being sent, they receive it in full without any deduction. So those are the innovations that we have put in place to promote remittances and help grow financial inclusion in our country.
Thank you very much, Raymond. Maybe, Gabriela, I would ask you also a similar question, because indeed in Europe, we have a legislative framework that has opened the market with the PSD1 initially, and then PSD2 to non-bank service providers, which indeed provide maybe as a majority remittance services, well, depending on the markets in Europe, of course. So do you have a perspective as well on how these non-bank payment service providers, including fintechs, have contributed to this digitalization trend, despite what you mentioned earlier in terms of lack of data?
Yes, thank you, Seb. You provided the answer yourself. The new kids on the block, also in Sweden, are the digital remittance service providers that do not have a physical presence in Sweden, but offer their services through the internet or as an app-based service. They require, of course, that people are digitalized and banked, that is, have a payment card or a bank account. And in that respect, the payment account directive has certainly been helpful to make them more accessible. And in terms of being beneficial for developments within remittances, we should not forget the payment service directive, of course. And more provisions could perhaps have been relevant for one-leg transactions, and thus this will be looked into as part of the upcoming review, I understand. But the passporting regime for payment institution has definitely been key to many of the digital remittance service providers that are now available in Sweden.
Thank you very much, Gabriela. Indeed, this is some interesting perspectives also on the PSD2 review and the one-leg transactions, maybe for those who are not familiar with this terminology. In the Payment Services Directive, there are already some requirements for the transparency of the flows between a sender in Europe and a recipient outside Europe and vice versa. But these probably can still be improved, and in the framework of the PSD2 review, they can certainly be considered. Also in line with the objectives of the G20 Roadmap and the targets which were mentioned earlier. There is one on transparency, and indeed the objective is to have a transparency of the total costs of transactions, which certainly acts as a powerful leverage for remittance senders to make a better informed choice in their selection of services. Veronica, you have mentioned before indeed that there is indeed a clear evolution towards digitalization, as everybody else also agrees. How is this reflected, let's say, from the perspective of your membership? What are the main, let's say, challenges and that come with it? You also mentioned de-risking. You mentioned the problems of access. Can you perhaps elaborate a little bit further on these challenges?
Yes. As I said before, with COVID-19, the remittance services provider was very, they had to react very quickly. So they came with, regarding innovation, you know, they was the first point we were talking, they linked different products and services with the financial technology. Just to mention a few examples of what we saw is, for example, one of our members that partnered with the construction label exchange center in Malaysia. And that was an example to show how through his platform, they managed to allow the workers of the construction industry to receive their salary digitally. These are people that sometimes, you know, are unbanked, and it's a way to get them into digital. Also, another example could be of how they actually link remittances with other services is we have one member that during the COVID crisis and the lockdowns in some areas, you know, there was a lack of, it was not easy to have food or to buy because the prices were fluctuating, especially in areas like Zimbabwe. So one of our members launched a service where migrants from South Africa, Malawi, Zambia, and Botswana could send through the platform, could buy and send the grocery packs to the families in Zimbabwe. Then there was, and that was all digital. Other example could be launch of medical plan for refugees in case they need to be hospitalized, or insurance policies, and many like that. But of course, we know that it's not about just an app and launching it and you will onboard. There are a lot of challenges. It was a good initiative from FATF to come with EKYC directive guidance, but we needed the regulators to apply. Not all of them were applied, or not all of them permitted that to happen. So that was an issue. I mean, it was more complicated to onboard some of the migrants, that were, don't forget that we noticed an increase on customers as well, but some of these migrants were coming from the cash, and some of the other migrants were coming also from the cash to the digital. So some of them were already in the system, but we had an important inflow from the informal channels with lockdowns in place and travel restrictions in place as well. So cash could not cross borders. So an important flow from the informal channel moved to the formal, but we needed to digitalize that. So that took time. Another problem that we had was, that we could see from the members, was liquidity issues. Liquidity issues came also into the picture. And yes, bank de-risking. Bank de-risking, we noticed it was increasing. And obviously, because of the lockdowns, it was even more challenging in order to find alternative solutions. Not even to consider having a new bank account, because no one will have an interview or have the meetings. And they were not offering to have virtual calls or anything like that. So it was a challenge, and it was even a challenge to onboard the clients. Another thing is, some of the clients, you mentioned transparency. Some of these clients were coming for the first time to the digital transactions, but they were having already a retail experience, probably online. So they come with expectations. So another thing that some of the remittance services providers implemented was, for example, trackings on the digital transactions. Customers are very much interested in knowing where the money is all the time. And that's one of the things that we find it important, because we always talk about pricing, speed. It is important, but if you talk to the migrants, they will clearly mention one of the most important things is trust. They want to trust. Who do they give all that information they have to give every time they have to send $100? And they want to trust where is that money all the time. So once they try the digital, they try the digital transaction, and they find that they can trust that company, they're most likely to stay. But like usually, first we have to onboard them. So that's the key issue.
Thank you very much for adding this perspective on trust, which indeed is a very important and relevant one. Maybe I would go back now to the G20 plans and roadmap implementation. So indeed, there's an ambitious agenda out there. The question is, indeed, if it will really be implemented as foreseen. So maybe I would ask the perspective of Raymond, for instance, to start with, about how he sees, his own country moving along with the G20 agenda, knowing that indeed from what he presented, there are a few initiatives already ongoing and taking into account the importance of remittances for the economy in the Philippines. Certainly, there's quite an incentive, to further improve the situation for migrant workers, but of course not everything depends on one of the sides of the transaction, right? You need to,
Yes.
that's why you need a global approach. And yeah, so everybody's collaboration is needed, as said before.
Okay. So we did an assessment of the G20 roadmap, and based on our assessment on the building blocks described in that roadmap, we assessed them, as far as the Philippines is concerned, as medium to high priority. And moving forward, our main concern for cross-borders, the coordinating the regulatory, supervisory, and oversight framework, which are all in focus area B, and also the improvement of the existing payment infrastructures and arrangements. That is in focus area C, and the enhancement of data quality and the straight-through processing among the different countries, participating countries. So that's how we look at the G20 roadmap.
Thank you, Raymond. This is indeed a very interesting perspective. Well, it's indeed one, you've mentioned one of the perhaps let's say potentially more powerful initiatives, the linking of payment infrastructures, for instance, taking into account also the development of the rapid development of instant payments across the globe. So there are perhaps promising prospects for significantly improving the backbone infrastructures that will allow more efficiency in cross-border payments.
Yes, and that includes the legal framework, because each country is unique. So we have to harmonize it.
Indeed, absolutely. And this is not such an easy task. What do you think about that, Gabriela? Do you see that this is feasible? Managing to harmonize further regulatory frameworks. We've done it in the EU, right? So, but of course, in the EU, we have certain, let's say, possibilities to harmonize things maybe more easily than countries that are totally let's say independent from each other. And that's one perhaps first question, but more generally on the G20 roadmap, indeed, what are your expectations, and how do you think that the objectives of the G20 roadmap can be reached? Indeed, what is necessary for that? Is it commitment globally? What do you think?
Well, I think there is no one bullet solution here. We need a combination of efforts and of course international collaboration. I think that having high ambitions is a very good start point. We have already realized that this is needed, and that we need to have large reaching targets. In that sense, the block number one, I think, is very important. And then also, of course, the question of standardization of the regulatory framework, as you mentioned, it's a challenge to do so internationally or globally. But as long as we all understand that this needs to be done, and there is in politics there is a question of intention. If the intention is there and the will to do, we will be able to do so, and I hope we do actually. So we are all working together on this now, and there is a realization that this needs to be done. So of course, as I mentioned before, I'm thinking of the problem with de-risking and so on. I think that block 5 on how to harmonize the implementation of CML and AML, I'm sorry, and CTF is very important. And all the blocks are important, I think, in terms that if they achieve the goal of improving cross-border payments, that will also include remittances. And I have to make a stand for the one that we are heavily engaged in, and that's the future of payments. Because maybe these new kids in town, you know, CBDCs can do what hasn't been done until now, if they are from the beginning designed as to work with each other cross-border. And that could be also an issue that would improve financial inclusion and universal access. Of course, stable coins, as I said before, could also help here contribute if they are properly regulated. I don't know. So we will see. Multilateral platforms maybe are. It's not really the question for, or the issue for remittances in this case. It's more a question of improving other type of cross-border payment flows. But CBDCs and stablecoins could maybe contribute to alleviate the problem.
Thank you very much indeed. This perspective on CBDC and stable coins is very useful, and I think with the e-krona project over the last years, you had the opportunity also to reflect on whether you could envisage to give access to e-krona to citizens in other countries, for instance. I think that's one of the key issues that one needs to reflect upon in terms of potential use for remittance purposes. And stable coins, certainly, yes, the key issue is indeed to regulate them properly, which we are trying to do in Europe, as you may know, with the legislative proposal on the table. And so there are new avenues as well beyond the existing more traditional players. But I mean, I guess the word traditional now is maybe a bit something of the past, because there are lots of new business models and new interfaces and so that is indeed helping us to hope, to be hopeful, and to let's say be ambitious with a certain let's say comfort that we can be ambitious about ambition. Yes.
May I say something here, because when you mentioned the e-krona and providing the e-krona to foreigners, and we need to be cautious there, because central banks are looking into these issues of international payments with CBDCs, and there is also always a risk of what is called digital dollarization. That if you allow access to your CBDC to other countries, you might influence, that you have spillovers, economic spillovers from country to country, or you can have, threaten certain countries' national sovereign currency. So what we are thinking right now, and nothing is decided, is more like in the line of having, domestic CBDCs working together, so you can have some exchange, but the access of CBDC will be probably restricted if they are launched at some point to domestic users and probably the tourists and people coming into the country. The thing is to allow to make payments between CBDCs in the same way that we have to improve the ways that we make payments between fiat currencies in different countries.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you for this useful addition indeed. Veronica, you wanted also to intervene, and I was going to ask you your perspective about, how ambitious we can be, and in particular regarding the targets. Do you have any reaction to these targets that have just been published for public for consultation by the FSB?
Yes, I have to say regarding the plan, the whole roadblock is we believe is very ambitious. But like Gabriela says, we have to be ambitious in order to achieve something. If we whatever progress we do, it will be better than nothing, and it's very good. And I agree with Raymond when he mentioned regarding the blocks B, C, and D. I have to say most of these blocks are connected with remittances in one way or another. But B, C, and D are very important because, like Gabriela was saying, especially AML, number 5, it's incredibly important. And now we are talking about first we were talking about bank de-risking. What is driving bank de-risking? Is it misinterpretation of the AML standard, or is it misuse of the AML standard? So I think exploring more AML, the block number 5 is very good and very ambitious. But there are a lot of things. We also talked about how the PSD2 and how Europe could organize themselves. Like put the house in order with the PSD2. But we have to say, working with remittances for going outside Europe, that's the other picture. I mean, Europe is very controlled. Yes, you have the rules, but for example, GDPR, it's a problem when you are working with countries outside Europe. And that's one of the things that we would like to see, more focus on these building blocks, that we find a way how to communicate with the other countries outside the bloc in order to be able to, like this, we are there, PSD2 came with like I said before, organized everything, but what about outside? How do we communicate? How do we cross this? How do we go out of this block? It was talked. There was also a conversation about stable coins, and CBDC. Okay, it might not touch remittances now, but we have to think about, because the problem we have with remittances is settlement. It's not giving a CBDC, to the customer, to the receiver in Philippines or in another country. I mean, people don't want to have digital assets or stable coins, or they cannot buy milk, except in Salvador, I think. They cannot buy milk, or bread with that. So we have to think also when we think about the roadmap is, well, in the case of remittances, I'm talking about remittances. We normally think, what do the sender need? What can the sender send, and what does the beneficiary need? I mean, what can they do with that? Is enough liquidity on the market for the currency that they are working with that and they receive on the other side? So we have to think about also, we normally say, what does the customer want to receive? And what can he do with what he receives? And that is when we are going to have them financially included. And I think the roadmap will show that it's actually working, and all this fragmentation is like shaping and making a bit more order. It's incredible ambitions, the plan, and I hope we can achieve as much as possible. I would like to say everything, but I find it really, really ambitious. And my concern is that, Theo, you probably remember from previous meetings that we were together, is we have meetings with different stakeholders, but not always the stakeholders are with the same agenda. And what happens is that we end up shifting responsibility from one side to the others, and not always achieving what we were supposed to achieve. So I hope, like Victoria said at the beginning, strong international collaboration. I hope we will have that. And I hope we all work together on that. And I think COVID helped us, everyone, to kind of leave your agenda behind and to work together. So I hope the lesson is learned and the lesson is taken, and we continue with this.
Thank you, Veronica. These look like very much closing remarks from your side to me. So maybe I will give the opportunity to the other panelists if they want to say a few final words from their perspective on this discussion. And then I think we are slowly coming to the end of the session. So Raymond, do you want to go first and say some final words from your perspective on this?
Sure, thank you. The Philippines, being the fourth largest recipient country for remittances, are really very much interested though the initiatives of the G20 and also on the potentials of CBDC and stablecoin. We believe that with the appropriate oversight and regulatory framework, the use of CBDCs and stablecoins can result in shorter payment chains, faster and more definite remittances, and there is more competition, broader competition among remittance providers. With this, there will be benefit in our country as we develop our domestic remittance system. So we can align, we can link with the international remittance company and exploit more on the receiving of remittance here. And I wish that G20 would continue the discussion on the roadmap. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Raymond. And Gabriela, do you want to say some final words as well?
Thank you, Theo. I completely agree with what Raymond was saying. The whole point or the goal of work done on CBDCs is to improve the efficiency of the payment system domestically and internationally. And in terms of efficiency, it's not just a question of lower cost and fewer layers and intermediaries. It's also a question of increased competition and inclusiveness, providing basic services to all citizens and not only to those that are profitable to the financial sector. And that's the role of the state, actually. So I'm very happy that central banks are working together on this to provide basic payment services to all their citizens. And I'm also very proud and happy about the ambitious plan of the G20 Roadmap and that we are all working together on this. So I wish us all good luck and good speed ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gabriela. And in fact, you've made my task quite complicated or simple. I would say simple for the closing remarks, because you have said it all essentially. I would, on my side, say that 4 keywords would summarize, let's say, what I would like to see on this agenda for cross-border payments and remittances: ambition, determination, collaboration, and inclusiveness. So these, from my perspective, were indeed ideas that were echoed by all the panelists. There's a momentum definitely to bring the cross-border payments agenda and remittances agenda at the same level, perhaps, as the domestic agendas for improving domestic payment systems and services. But for that, indeed, we need to keep up the level of ambition. And perhaps that's why the G20 Roadmap is very ambitious, but rightly so. We need that ambition. So we need targets that are ambitious as well. And we need to indeed strive to meet those targets collectively, globally, because as we know, in a payment transaction, there are always 2 sides. And the 2 sides need to work on improving efficiency, straight-through processing, etc. There are a few challenges on the way in terms of access, in terms of AML, CFT, in terms of different regulatory frameworks. But indeed, we have a way forward on how to tackle these challenges. So it's important to follow that path. Indeed, I guess that, with the collaboration of all and having, this inclusiveness objective in mind, we can achieve a lot. So that's how I would put it for for closing this panel. I would like to thank the panelists for their very useful presentations and interesting insights, and for the discussion, and for the audience. I would like to thank the audience as well. And I would like to remind everybody to take the feedback satisfaction survey that we see now on the screen. And I will also give you some information on the next session on the 17th of June at 9 a.m. EST, a session on EID and the role of KYC registries and other technological solutions. And this session will deep dive into eKYC registries, collaborative solutions for eKYC, which impact individuals and micro enterprises and SMEs, and key design features of registries, KYC and identity authentication being critical for numerous financial processes, from onboarding a new client to making payments and insurance claims. Underpinned KYC processes, a KYC registry is a centralized repository of key ID attributes and other data that enable the identification of clients and contribute to efficiency of verification processes to meet customer due diligence requirements. So again, thank you, everybody, and have a nice afternoon, morning, or evening. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.